Sometimes the most broken people build the most beautiful things. Sometimes a father's love can move mountains, in this case, make impossible airplanes fly. In the Nevada desert, billionaire Victor Hale has a problem. Every engineer he hires quits within days. His experimental planes stay grounded. His dreams are dying. Then Cal Bishop shows up, a broke single dad who fixes old crop dusters for almost nothing. Everyone bets he won't last a week. But Cal has something the others don't. He has a son who believes in him. And sometimes that's enough to work miracles. While the experts fail, Cal starts solving problems nobody else could touch. He turns a toxic workplace into a family. He makes Victor's impossible vision real. But the biggest transformation isn't in the planes. What happens when a simple mechanic's heart reveals the one thing money can't buy? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted the Nevada desert in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the weathered trailer that Cal Bishop called home. Inside, 8-year-old Tommy sat at their small kitchen table, carefully sketching another airplane in his worn notebook, a collection of dreams and mechanical fantasies that had grown thick with pages over the past year. "Dad, look at this one," Tommy said, holding up his latest creation. "It's got wings that change shape when it flies fast, just like a bird." Cal smiled as he poured instant coffee into his favorite mug, one of the few things left from their old life. The mug bore the faded logo of Nellis Air Force Base, where he'd once been Sergeant Bishop, one of the finest aircraft mechanics in the 99th Air Base Wing. Now, 3 years after Sarah's death, he was just Carla man, trying to keep food on the table and hope in his son's heart. "That's brilliant, buddy," Cal said, settling into the chair across from Tommy. The boy's enthusiasm never failed to amaze him. Even in their cramped trailer, surrounded by the constant reminders of how far they'd fallen, Tommy's imagination soared. "Tell me how the wings work." Tommy's eyes lit up, the same bright hazel as his mother's had been. "Well, when the plane needs to go really fast, the wings get narrow and sharp. But when it needs to land or carry heavy things, they spread out wide for more lift." He traced the sketched mechanisms with his finger. "I think there could be tiny motors in here that move them, connected to the pilot's controls." Cal's chest tightened with pride and pain. The boy had Sarah's mind curious, methodical, always seeing connections others missed. She'd been a trauma nurse, the kind who could diagnose problems before doctors even knew what to look for. Tommy had inherited that intuitive understanding, but directed toward mechanical things instead of medical ones. "You know what?" Cal said, reaching across to ruffle his son's sandy brown hair. "I think you might be onto something there. Variable geometry wings aren't just fantasy, they're used on some military aircraft." "Really?" Tommy's face glowed. "Like what you worked on?" "Similar concept," Cal nodded. "The F-111 had swing wings. They could adjust for different flight conditions." He paused, remembering those days when aircraft mysteries were puzzles to solve, not bills he couldn't pay. "You've got a good eye for engineering, just like Mum," Tommy finished quietly. It was their ritual, this gentle acknowledgement of the woman who'd shaped them both before cancer took her away. Tommy had been 5 when Sarah died, old enough to remember her laugh but young enough to idealize her memory into something pure and perfect. Cal's phone buzzed against the table. The display showed a number he didn't recognize, with a Las Vegas area code. His stomach-clenched creditors had been calling more frequently lately. "Cal Bishop." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, female. "That's me. This is Elena Rodriguez from Hale Aerospace. I'm calling about a mechanical position that might interest you." Cal frowned. He'd never heard of Hale Aerospace, and he certainly hadn't applied anywhere recently. His job search had been limited to crop dusting operations and small repair shops within driving distance. "I think you might have the wrong person. Are you the Cal Bishop who served as an aircraft mechanic at Nellis from 2018 to 2021, specialized in advanced propulsion systems?" "Yes, but..." And you currently maintain aircraft for Henderson Valley Agricultural Services? Cal glanced at Tommy, who was pretending to read his airplane book but obviously listening. That's right. Look, if this is about a debt collection, Mr. Bishop, this is about a job. A very well-paying job. Mr. Victor Hale specifically requested that we contact you. The name meant nothing to Cal, but the phrase, well-paying, made his pulse quicken. Their trailer rent was 3 weeks overdue, and Tommy needed new school clothes before the semester started. I'm listening. Mr. Hale owns a private aircraft development facility about 90 miles northeast of Las Vegas. He's looking for an experienced mechanic to work on some experimental aircraft. The position pays $200,000 annually, plus benefits and housing allowance. Cal nearly dropped the phone. $200,000 was more than he'd made in the military, more than he'd dreamed of earning again. I'm sorry, could you repeat that number? $200,000, Mr. Bishop. The work is challenging, and Mr. Hale has very high standards, but for the right person, it's an exceptional opportunity. Tommy looked up from his book, sensing the change in his father's voice. Cal turned away, not wanting to raise the boy's hopes until he understood what this was really about. What kind of experimental aircraft? I'm not authorized to discuss specifics over the phone, but I can tell you that Mr. Hale is developing revolutionary propulsion and aerodynamic systems. The project has significant backing and unlimited resources. Unlimited resources. The phrase sounded like something from Tommy's dreams. Why me? I fix crop dusters these days, not experimental jets. Mr. Hale reviewed your military service record. Your work on the Joint Strike Fighter program particularly impressed him. He believes you have the practical experience and innovative thinking he needs. Cal closed his eyes. The JSF program had been the pinnacle of his career, working alongside Lockheed Martin engineers to solve propulsion problems that had stumped teams of PhDs. He'd loved that work, the intellectual challenge, the feeling of pushing boundaries, but that felt like a lifetime ago. There's a catch, isn't there? Cal asked. Jobs like this don't just fall out of the sky. Elena's pause lasted just a moment too long. Mr. Hale is particular about his standards. The position has had some turnover recently. How much turnover? The facility has gone through several mechanics in the past year, but Mr. Hale believes you might be different. Your background suggests you have the patience and creativity needed for this type of work. Cal looked at Tommy, who was now openly staring at him with hopeful eyes. The boy had been asking about their financial situation lately, too perceptive for his own good. Last week, Tommy had offered to sell his airplane models to help with bills, breaking Cal's heart with his innocent generosity. When would this start? Mr. Hale would like to meet with you as soon as possible. Could you drive out tomorrow for an interview? Cal thought about his current schedule. He had 3 crop dusters to service this week, earning him maybe $400 total. The contrast was almost laughable. I can make time. Excellent. I'll text you the address and directions. The facility is remote, so plan for a full day. Oh, and Mr. Bishop? Mr. Hale prefers to interview candidates while they're working. Bring your tools. After Elena hung up, Cal stared at the phone for a long moment. Tommy had abandoned all pretense of reading and was watching him with barely contained excitement. Dad? Was that about airplanes? Cal sat back down across from his son. Maybe. There's a man who builds experimental aircraft, and he wants to meet with me about a job. Real experimental planes, like the ones I draw. Maybe even cooler than the ones you draw. Tommy's grin could have powered the entire trailer park. Are you going to take it? I have to meet with him first. But Tommy, Cal reached across the table to take his son's small hand. We can't get too excited yet, okay? Sometimes things don't work out the way we hope. But sometimes they do, Tommy said with the absolute faith of childhood. And you're the best airplane fixer in the world. Mom always said so. Cal's throat tightened. Sarah had indeed said that, usually when he was working late in their garage, rebuilding some vintage aircraft engine he'd bought at a salvage yard. She'd tease him about his airplane addiction, but her pride had been genuine. She'd believed in his abilities, even when he couldn't find work that matched them. "We'll see, buddy. But either way, you keep drawing those planes. Deal?" "Deal." Tommy returned to his notebook, but Cal could see the excitement radiating from him like heat from a summer sidewalk. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Cal sat outside the trailer looking up at the star-filled desert sky. Somewhere out there, aircraft moved through the darkness, commercial jets carrying families to reunions, military planes protecting borders, private aircraft chasing dreams of freedom and speed. He thought about the call, about the impossible salary figure, about the warning signs Elena had tried to downplay. High turnover usually meant difficult working conditions or unreasonable expectations, but it also meant opportunity for someone willing to stick it out. The truth was, he needed this chance, not just for the money, though God knew they needed that. He needed to feel useful again, to work on something that mattered, to be the man Sarah had married, instead of the broken-down shadow he'd become. Cal pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Jimmy Martinez, his old crew chief from Nellis. Jimmy now worked for a defense contractor in California, still deep in the world of advanced aircraft systems. "Cal, Jesus, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" "I'm making it work," Cal said, which was their old code for struggling but not ready to give up. "Jimmy, I need to ask you about something. You ever heard of a Victor Hale or Hale Aerospace?" The pause on Jimmy's end stretched long enough to make Cal nervous. "Where did you hear that name?" "They offered me a job. Big money, experimental aircraft. Too good to be true, probably." "Cal, Victor Hale isn't just rich, he's stupid rich. Tech billionaire, made his fortune in quantum computing or some other science fiction stuff. Word is, he's been burning money on aviation projects for the past few years." "What kind of projects?" "The kind that make Boeing engineers quit their jobs and move to Nevada. Revolutionary propulsion, advanced materials, stuff that's supposedly 20 years ahead of anything else flying. But what? But nobody can make his designs work. The guy's brilliant, apparently, but also a perfectionist who won't accept that some things are impossible. He goes through engineers like tissue paper." Cal's heart sank. "So it's a dead end?" "Maybe. Or maybe you're exactly what he needs. You always had a way of making broken things work, even when the manual said they couldn't." After the call, Cal walked back inside and checked on Tommy. The boy was asleep, his airplane journal open beside him on the bed. The latest sketch showed a sleek aircraft with impossibly elegant lines, more art than engineering. Beneath it, Tommy had written in careful block letters, "For Dad's new job." Cal gently closed the journal and tucked it under Tommy's arm. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever Victor Hale turned out to be, Cal would give it everything he had. Not for the money, not for his own pride, but for the boy who still believed his father could fix anything that was broken. Even if the most broken thing of all was Cal himself. The Hale Aerospace facility materialized from the desert heat like a mirage made real. Cal had been driving northeast for 2 hours, following increasingly remote roads until civilization disappeared behind him. Now, cresting a low hill, he found himself looking down at a compound that seemed to belong on another planet. The main building was a study in curves and angles, all glass and brushed steel that caught the morning light like a jewel. Surrounding it were 3 massive hangars, their doors tall enough to accommodate commercial aircraft. A control tower rose from the center of the complex, and Cal could see the geometric patterns of a runway extending into the distance. But it was the silence that struck him most. No air traffic, no ground crew activity, no signs of the controlled chaos that usually surrounded active aircraft facilities. Just pristine buildings, gleaming in the desert sun, as beautiful and empty as a museum after closing time. Cal parked his battered pickup truck next to a row of luxury vehicles. Tesla, Porsche, Mercedes, and immediately felt out of place. His work clothes and tool bag seemed crude next to all this polished perfection. But he squared his shoulders and walked toward the main entrance, remembering Sarah's advice. You belong wherever your skills are needed. The lobby was as impressive as the exterior soaring ceilings, abstract art that probably cost more than Cal's annual income, and a reception desk that looked carved from a single piece of black marble. Behind it sat a woman in her 30s with short, dark hair and kind eyes, who smiled as he approached. "Mr. Bishop, I'm Elena Rodriguez. Welcome to Hale Aerospace." "Thank you for arranging this," Cal said, shaking her hand. "I have to admit, this isn't what I expected." "Most people say that. Mr. Hale will meet you in Hangar 3. I should warn you he prefers to skip the formalities and get straight to the technical discussion." Elena led him through corridors lined with photographs of aircraft throughout aviation history, from the Wright Flyer to the SR-71 Blackbird, to conceptual designs that looked like they belonged in science fiction movies. But Cal noticed something odd. There were no photographs of the aircraft actually built here, no evidence of successful flights or completed projects. Hangar 3 was a cathedral of steel and light. The doors were open, revealing an interior space large enough to house several commercial jets. But instead of aircraft, Cal saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. 3 vehicles sat in the center of the hangar, if they could even be called vehicles. They were unlike anything he'd ever seen, sleek forms that seemed to flow like liquid metal, with surfaces that shifted between silver and deep blue depending on the viewing angle. They weren't quite airplanes, weren't quite spacecraft, but something entirely new. "Beautiful, aren't they?" The voice came from behind one of the craft. A man emerged, tall, lean, with graying hair, and the kind of intense eyes that seemed to see through everything they looked at. He wore expensive jeans and a simple white button-down shirt, but there was nothing casual about his bearing. "Victor Hale," he said, extending his hand, "and you must be the man who's going to make these fly properly." Cal shook hands, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested Victor worked with his hands as much as his mind. "Cal Bishop, though I should probably take a look before I make any promises." Victor's smile was sharp. "Honest. I like that. The last 3 mechanics assured me they could handle anything I threw at them. They were wrong." He led Cal toward the nearest aircraft, and as they got closer, Cal could see the extraordinary level of detail in the construction. Every surface was perfectly smooth, every joint invisible. The cockpit was a teardrop of transparent material that seemed to blend seamlessly with the fuselage. "Variable geometry wings," Victor said, touching a section of the craft that looked solid but was apparently hinged. "They reshape themselves based on flight conditions, optimizing lift and drag in real time. The control surfaces are distributed across the entire airframino, traditional rudder or elevators." Cal walked slowly around the aircraft, taking in the alien beauty of its design. "What about propulsion?" "That's where it gets interesting." Victor pressed something on a control panel, and sections of the craft's belly opened to reveal the engine bay. Cal leaned in and felt his heart skip. He was looking at an engine configuration that defied everything he knew about aircraft propulsion. Instead of a traditional turbofan or turbojet, he saw a complex arrangement of rotating elements, magnetic coils, and what appeared to be superconducting materials. It was like someone had taken a jet engine and rebuilt it according to principles that hadn't been invented yet. "Jesus," Cal whispered. "What is this?" "The future," Victor said. "Magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion combined with plasma field manipulation. No combustion, no fossil fuels, nearly silent operation. When it works properly, it produces thrust-to-weight ratios that make rockets look primitive." Cal studied the schematic mounted on a nearby wall. The technical drawings were incredibly detailed, showing every component and subsystem, but they might as well have been written in an alien language. The mathematics alone would challenge a team of PhD engineers. "When it works properly," Cal repeated. "I'm guessing that's the problem." Victor's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, we had our first test flight. The aircraft lifted off beautifully, demonstrated perfect maneuverability, reached speeds that broke several unacknowledged records. Then, 30 minutes into the flight, total system failure. The pilot barely made it back alive. What kind of failure? That's what I've been trying to determine. The engine systems are incredibly complex. thousands of interdependent components that must function in perfect harmony. The slightest misalignment or timing error causes cascade failures throughout the entire propulsion system. Cal nodded slowly. He'd seen similar problems with experimental military aircraft, though nothing quite this advanced. And your previous mechanics? Dr. Sarah Chen from MIT lasted 2 weeks before declaring the project impossible. Marcus Webb, who helped design the F-35's engine systems, lasted 10 days. The most recent, James Crawford, made it exactly 6 days before he packed up and left without even saying goodbye. Victor gestured toward a workstation covered with diagnostic equipment, computer monitors showing complex waveforms, and tools that looked like they belonged in a medical operating room rather than an aircraft hangar. The engine test runs show perfect theoretical performance, but when we integrate with the aircraft systems, everything falls apart. The electromagnetic fields interfere with each other. The plasma containment becomes unstable. The whole system goes into harmonic resonance and tears itself apart. Cal studied the diagnostic readouts, trying to make sense of the data. The mathematics were beyond him, but the patterns looked familiar. He'd seen similar issues with high-performance military engine systems, so advanced that tiny variables could cause major problems. What about environmental factors? Cal asked. Desert conditions, temperature variations, electromagnetic interference from your own facility. Victor paused. What do you mean? Well, you've got a lot of electronic systems in here. Radio communications, computer networks, diagnostic equipment, all of that generates electromagnetic fields. Maybe your engine is picking up interference from sources you haven't considered. The previous mechanics ran extensive EMI tests. Did they run them with everything operational? All your facility systems, all your diagnostic equipment, all your computers talking to each other? Victor stared at him for a long moment. No, they tested individual components in isolation. Cal walked back to the engine bay, running his hands along the superconducting coils. The metal was cold to the touch, even in the desert heat. These materials are incredibly sensitive to magnetic fields, right? Even tiny fluctuations could affect performance. Theoretically, yes, but... And you said the test flight failed after 30 minutes. That's about how long it would take for all the facility systems to be fully active after startup. For the desert to reach peak electromagnetic activity from thermal effects, for your computers to finish their diagnostic cycles and settle into normal operating patterns. Victor's eyes widened. You think the facility itself is sabotaging the tests? I think you've built something so sophisticated that it's being affected by variables you never thought to control. It's like trying to tune a violin while sitting next to a rock concert. For the first time since Cal had arrived, Victor looked genuinely excited. That actually makes sense. But if you're right, how do we fix it? Cal looked around the hangar, taking in all the electronic equipment, the computer stations, the diagnostic instruments. We start by understanding exactly what kind of electromagnetic environment you're creating here. Then we figure out how to isolate your aircraft systems from interference. That could take months. The previous mechanics wanted to redesign the entire engine system. Sometimes the problem isn't the machine, Cal said quietly. Sometimes it's everything around the machine. Victor studied him for a long moment. The others were brilliant engineers with decades of experience and advanced degrees. What makes you think you can succeed where they failed? Cal thought about Tommy's airplane journal, about his son's innocent questions that often revealed the simple truth hidden beneath complex problems. He thought about Sarah, who could diagnose medical conditions by noticing patterns that escaped experienced doctors. Because I'm not trying to be smarter than your aircraft, Cal said. I'm trying to understand what it needs. Victor extended his hand again. Mr. Bishop, you're hired. When can you start? Tomorrow, Cal said, shaking hands. But I should warn you I work differently than your previous mechanics. I like to take my time, understand systems completely before I start making changes. After 3 failures, I'm willing to try patience. Victor's smile was genuine now, touched with something that might have been hope. Elena will handle the paperwork and housing arrangements. Welcome to Hale Aerospace. As Cal drove home that evening, the impossible aircraft replaying in his mind, he thought about the complexity of what he'd committed to. The technology was decades beyond anything he'd worked with. The mathematics alone would require months of study, and the pressure to succeed was enormous. But he also remembered the moment when Victor's eyes lit up at his simple observation about electromagnetic interference. Sometimes the most sophisticated problems had surprisingly straightforward solutions. Sometimes all it took was someone willing to look at the situation from a completely different angle. That night, as he tucked Tommy into bed, his son looked up at him with bright, hopeful eyes. "How were the airplanes, Dad?" Cal smiled. "More amazing than anything you've drawn yet, but also more complicated." "That's okay," Tommy said with absolute confidence. "You'll figure it out. You always do." As Cal turned off the light, he hoped his son was right, because tomorrow he would begin working on aircraft that pushed the boundaries of physics itself, trying to solve problems that had defeated some of the best engineers in the world. But he had something they didn't, a child's faith in his abilities, and the memory of a woman who had always believed he could fix anything that was broken. Cal arrived at Hale Aerospace before dawn, carrying Sarah's old medical bag, converted into his personal toolkit. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, first by his wife as she tended to trauma patients, now by him as he approached mechanical problems with the same methodical care she'd shown her patients. Inside the bag were tools that looked nothing like the high-tech instruments filling the hangar. Simple multimeters, basic hand tools, a collection of small mirrors for seeing into tight spaces, and a stethoscope eyes, a medical stethoscope that he used to listen to engine sounds the way Sarah had listened to heartbeats. The facility was eerily quiet at this hour, just the hum of climate control systems and computers maintaining their endless vigilance. Cal made his way to Hangar 3, where the 3 experimental aircraft waited like sleeping giants. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing the technical documentation. Victor had provided thousands of pages of specifications, test results, and failure reports. The mathematics were indeed beyond him, but the patterns of failure were becoming clearer. Every catastrophic breakdown followed the same progression: initial perfect performance, gradual degradation of plasma containment, harmonic resonance in the magnetic field generators, and finally complete system collapse. What struck Cal was how similar this was to problems he'd encountered with Sarah's patients in the emergency room. She'd often dealt with cases where perfectly healthy people would suddenly develop cascading medical failures, one small problem triggering another, which triggered another, until the entire system crashed. "You're here early." Cal turned to see a young woman approaching from the direction of the main building, carrying a steaming coffee cup and what looked like a stack of engineering reports. She was maybe 25, with long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who'd been working all night. "Riley Chen," she said, extending her free hand. "Systems integration engineer. You must be the new mechanic everyone's talking about." "Cal Bishop. And what exactly is everyone saying?" Riley's smile was tired but genuine. "That you lasted longer than 5 minutes with Mr. Hale without running away screaming. That's actually a pretty good sign." She settled onto a nearby stool, clearly comfortable in the hangar environment. "I was here when the last guy, Crawford, had his final meeting with Victor. It was educational. Crawford kept insisting that the engine design was fundamentally flawed, that the physics were impossible. Victor kept explaining why Crawford was wrong. It went downhill fast." Cal opened Sarah's bag and began laying out his tools on the workstation. Riley watched with obvious curiosity as he arranged simple analog instruments next to sophisticated digital diagnostic equipment. "Is that a stethoscope?" "Best diagnostic tool I own," Cal said. "Engines have heartbeats just like people. When something's wrong, you can usually hear it before any computer picks it up." "Huh?" Riley looked intrigued rather than skeptical. "I never thought about it that way. Mind if I watch while you work? I've been on this project for 8 months, and I still don't fully understand how all the systems interact." Cal nodded toward the nearest aircraft. What's your background? MIT, dual degree in electrical and aeronautical engineering. I came here straight from graduate school because Victor offered me the chance to work on technology that's 20 years ahead of anything else in existence. And now, Riley's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Now I'm starting to wonder if some things are ahead of their time for good reasons. We keep hitting problems that seem solvable individually, but when we fix one thing, 3 other things break. Cal approached the aircraft's open engine bay and began his examination not with instruments, but with his eyes and hands. He traced the paths of magnetic field generators, felt the connections between superconducting elements, and listened to the subtle sounds the idle systems made. "Tell me about the plasma containment failure," he said. "Walk me through exactly what happens." Riley consulted her tablet, pulling up diagnostic data. Initial ignition proceeds normally. Plasma formation reaches optimal density and temperature. Magnetic bottles achieve stable configuration. Everything looks perfect for approximately 22 minutes. Then tiny fluctuations appear in the containment field strength. At first, they're so small that our diagnostic systems barely register them, but they grow exponentially, doubling every 30 seconds until the entire plasma column becomes unstable. Cal nodded, still running his hands along the engine components. What about external factors during those 22 minutes? External factors? Environmental changes, other systems coming online, anything that might affect the electromagnetic environment around the aircraft. Riley looked thoughtful. Well, the morning diagnostic cycle starts about 20 minutes after we begin engine tests. All the facility computers run their daily checks, network traffic peaks. As everyone accesses the system, the climate control adjusts for rising temperature. She trailed off, her eyes widening as she realized what Cal was suggesting. "You think the facility is interfering with the engine?" "I think this engine is so sensitive that it's picking up electromagnetic changes you're not even measuring." Cal placed the stethoscope against one of the superconducting coils and listened carefully. Even powered down, he could hear faint harmonic vibrations like the aircraft was humming to itself. But the EMI tested individual components under laboratory conditions, right? Not the complete system operating in a real environment with dozens of other electromagnetic sources. Riley was quiet for a long moment, obviously processing this possibility. "If you're right, the solution wouldn't be redesigning the engine. It would be controlling the electromagnetic environment." "Maybe, but first we need to understand exactly what kind of interference we're dealing with." Cal spent the next hour methodically documenting every electromagnetic source in the hangar: diagnostic equipment, computer systems, communications gear, even the LED lighting fixtures. Riley followed him, taking notes and asking increasingly sophisticated questions. "You know," she said as they finished the survey, "the previous mechanics all approached this like a purely engineering problem. Calculate the variables, apply the formulas, expect predictable results. And that's not working? That's not working because this isn't just engineering, it's art. These engines are so advanced, so sensitive, that they respond to variables we're not even conscious of. It's like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra while someone's setting off fireworks in the background." Cal smiled. "That's a good analogy. So what we need is a way to eliminate the fireworks, or at least understand their timing so we can work around them." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man in his 50s, well-dressed and carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. He looked surprised to see Cal and Riley working together. "And you are?" "Cal Bishop, the new mechanic. And you're?" "Marcus Webb, lead engineer." The handshake was firm but brief. "I see you've met our resident optimist." He nodded toward Riley, who rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Marcus walked over to examine Cal's tool setup, his expression skeptical. "Interesting choice of equipment. Very traditional." "Traditional tools for understanding fundamental problems," Cal replied mildly. "Fundamental problems." Marcus's tone sharpened. "Mr. Bishop, These aircraft represent the most advanced propulsion technology ever developed. The problems we're facing require sophisticated solutions, not folk remedies. Cal continued organizing his tools, not rising to the challenge. Sometimes sophisticated problems have simple causes, such as electromagnetic interference from sources you haven't considered. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. EMI testing was the first thing we did. I personally supervised comprehensive evaluations of every system in this facility. Under operational conditions, with everything running simultaneously, we tested. Marcus stopped, his confidence wavering slightly. We tested all primary interference sources. What about secondary sources, cumulative effects, harmonic interactions between different systems? Riley looked between the two men, sensing growing tension. Cal suggesting that we might be creating interference patterns that only appear when multiple systems operate together. Marcus's expression hardened. Riley, I've been designing aircraft engines for 23 years. I know how to test for electromagnetic interference. I'm sure you do, Cal said quietly. But you've never tested engines this advanced, have you? Engines so sensitive that they might pick up interference you've never had to worry about before. The question hung in the air between them. Marcus clearly wanted to dismiss Cal's suggestion, but couldn't quite manage it. Finally, he turned to Riley. Run a full spectrum analysis during the next engine test. Document every electromagnetic source, no matter how minor. If Mr. Bishop wants to chase ghosts, let's see what ghosts we can find. After Marcus left, Riley looked at Cal with new respect. That was diplomatically handled. Marcus is brilliant, but he doesn't like having his assumptions questioned. He's protected his team for 8 months while this project struggled, Cal said. That kind of loyalty makes you defensive. And you're not defensive about your ideas? Cal thought about Tommy, about the way his son approached problems with open curiosity rather than preconceived notions. I learned from someone who taught me that the best solutions come from asking simple questions, not defending complex answers. Riley smiled. Your son sounds pretty smart. Cal looked surprised. How did you know about Tommy? Because you just got the same look Sarah used to get when she talked about her patients like you were remembering someone who saw the world more clearly than the rest of us. For a moment, Cal was too moved to speak. Then he realized Riley had mentioned Sarah by name. You knew my wife? Not personally, but when Victor was researching your background, he found some articles about her work. Trauma medicine breakthrough techniques, methods for diagnosing complex conditions that other doctors missed. Riley's expression was gentle. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Cal picked up the stethoscope, remembering Sarah's hands guiding his as she taught him to hear the subtle differences in heartbeats. She taught me that the most important tool isn't the most sophisticated one. It's the one that helps you listen to what the patient is really telling you. And you think these engines are trying to tell us something. I think they're screaming at us, but we're too busy running diagnostics to hear what they're saying. Riley laughed. Well then, let's teach ourselves to listen. When do we start the next engine test? Cal looked at the 3 beautiful, impossible aircraft waiting in the desert light, streaming through the hangar doors. Somewhere in their alien complexity was a simple truth that had eluded brilliant engineers for months. Tomorrow morning, he said, and this time, we're going to hear everything. The next morning, Cal arrived to find an old, dented coffee maker sitting on a folding table near the entrance to Hangar 3. It looked like it had been rescued from a garage sale, its chrome surface tarnished, and its cord wrapped with electrical tape. A handwritten note was taped to its side. Property of the U.S. Air Force, Nellis AFB, donated by Cal Bishop. I hope you don't mind, Cal said, as Riley approached with an empty mug. I thought the team might appreciate real coffee while we work. Riley examined the machine with the same analytical attention she brought to aircraft systems. It's seen better days. 20 years of brewing coffee for aircraft mechanics. Sometimes the best tools are the ones that have proven themselves over time. Cal plugged in the machine and began preparing the first pot. Within minutes, The rich aroma of fresh coffee began to compete with the sterile scents of metal and electronics that normally filled the hangar. "Is this part of your diagnostic process?" Riley asked, amused. "Actually, yes. Good coffee makes people more willing to share information, and I suspect there's a lot of information around here that hasn't been properly shared." As if summoned by the coffee's aroma, other team members began to appear. First came Dr. Maria Santos, the facility's aerodynamic specialista woman in her 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Then Jake Morrison, their test pilot, a lean man with the calm demeanor that came from years of flying experimental aircraft. Finally, Dr. Chen Arrivadan, elderly Chinese-American man who turned out to be Riley's grandfather and the facility's chief theoretical physicist. Cal had read about Dr. Chen's work in plasma physics. His papers had helped lay the theoretical groundwork for the propulsion system. "Interesting addition to the hangar," Dr. Chen said, accepting a cup of coffee with obvious appreciation. "Very practical." "Mr. Bishop believes in simple solutions to complex problems," Marcus said as he joined the group. His tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced this was a virtue. "Sometimes the best insights come from the least expected places." Dr. Chen replied mildly. "In China, we have a saying, 'The wise find simplicity on the far side of complexity.'" Cal poured coffee for everyone, noting how the informal gathering seemed to soften the usual professional boundaries. Jake started telling stories about his previous test flights. Maria shared her concerns about aerodynamic instabilities, and even Marcus began to relax. "You know," Jake said, "I've been flying experimental aircraft for 15 years, and I've never encountered anything like what happens with these engines. It's not just mechanical failure, it's like the aircraft becomes confused, like it forgets how to fly." "Confused how?" Cal asked. "The control responses become erratic. The aircraft starts making corrections for problems that aren't there, overcorrecting until it's fighting itself. I can feel it through the controls, like the plane is arguing with its own systems." "Dr." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "That suggests feedback loops between systems that should be independent. The aircraft's control computers are interpreting electromagnetic fluctuations as flight control inputs." "Which means the interference isn't just affecting the engines," Maria added. "It's affecting the entire aircraft's nervous system." Cal felt a familiar spark of understanding. "Riley, yesterday you mentioned that the plasma containment starts fluctuating after about 22 minutes. Jake, how long into your test flights do you start feeling those control response problems?" Jake considered. "Usually around 20 minutes. Why?" "Because that's when the morning diagnostic cycle starts," Riley said, her eyes widening. "Every day at the same time, all our facility computers begin their automated maintenance routines." Marcus frowned. "But the diagnostic cycle is designed to run in the background. It shouldn't generate significant electromagnetic activity." "Individually, no," Dr. Chen said slowly. "But if multiple systems are running diagnostics simultaneously, and if those systems are communicating with each other, sharing data, updating databases, you get cumulative electromagnetic activity that builds over time," Cal finished. "Like voices in a choir, each one manageable alone, but together they can shake the building." Maria was already pulling up facility schematics on her tablet. "Look at this. We have 47 computer systems, 12 radar installations, 8 communication arrays, and 6 weather monitoring stations. Every morning at 6:22 a.m., they all begin their daily diagnostic routines. And our engine tests always begin at 6:00 a.m., Jake said, which means 22 minutes in. We get hit with a wall of electromagnetic noise that makes our sensitive engines go crazy," Riley concluded. Marcus looked stunned. "But why didn't this show up in our EMI testing?" "Because you tested individual systems, not the complete electromagnetic environment," Cal said gently. "It's like testing a violin string in a quiet room, then wondering why it sounds different in the middle of an orchestra." Dr. Chen was already running calculations on his tablet. "If Mr. Bishop is correct, we should be able to predict the interference patterns. More importantly, we should be able to control them. How? Marcus asked. By scheduling our test flights to avoid the diagnostic cycles, Jake suggested. Or by modifying the diagnostic timing to create electromagnetic quiet periods, Maria added. Cal smiled, watching the team collaborate with growing excitement. This was what he'd hoped for, not just solving a technical problem, but transforming the way the team worked together. There's something else to consider, he said. If the morning diagnostics are causing problems, what about all the other sources of electromagnetic activity? Evening system backups, communication traffic, weather monitoring updates. Riley was already nodding. We need to map the complete electromagnetic environment over a 24-hour cycle. Identify all the quiet periods, all the noisy periods, and all the transition points. I can modify our monitoring equipment to track cumulative electromagnetic activity instead of just individual sources, Dr. Chen offered. And I can schedule test flights during the identified quiet periods, Jake added. Marcus looked around the group, his skepticism giving way to genuine interest. This could actually work. But it's going to require coordination between every department, precise timing of all facility operations. Which means everyone needs to understand the importance of electromagnetic discipline, Cal said. One person running unauthorized diagnostics or leaving communication equipment active could compromise an entire test flight. Maria smiled. It's like learning to be a good neighbor. Everyone has to cooperate for the community to function. Over the following hours, the team threw themselves into the project with renewed energy. Dr. Chen began modifying monitoring equipment, while Riley created detailed schedules of facility operations. Maria studied aerodynamic data to identify correlations with electromagnetic events, and Jake planned new test flight protocols. Marcus, initially resistant, found himself taking on the role of project coordinator, his organizational skills proving essential for managing the complex scheduling requirements. Cal moved between the team members, offering suggestions, asking questions, and gradually earning their trust. But more importantly, he watched as they began to work together in ways they hadn't before. The coffee maker became an unofficial meeting point where ideas were shared informally and problems were discussed openly. You know, Riley said during one of these impromptu coffee break meetings, this is the first time in months that I've felt optimistic about this project. Because we might have identified the problem, Jake asked. Because we're finally working as a team instead of a collection of individual experts, Dr. Chen replied. Sometimes the solution isn't technical, it's social. That evening, as the team prepared to leave, Marcus approached Cal privately. I owe you an apology, he said. I was wrong to dismiss your ideas so quickly. Cal shook his head. You were protecting your team and your project. That's what good leaders do. But I was also being arrogant. I assumed that because I understood the technology, I understood the problem. The technology isn't the problem, Cal said. The problem is making the technology work in the real world, with all its messy complications and unexpected variables. Marcus smiled. My daughter would say you've got good people skills for a mechanic. Your daughter sounds smart. She is. She's also constantly reminding me that being right about the details doesn't mean you're right about the big picture. As Cal drove home that evening, he reflected on the day's progress. They hadn't solved the engine problems yet, hadn't conducted any successful test flights. But they had something more valuable, a team that was beginning to function as a unified group rather than competing individuals. When he arrived home, Tommy was waiting with his airplane journal open to a new page. Dad, look at this design. It's an airplane that can change its shape to match different flying conditions, but it also has special shields to protect it from lightning and radio waves. Cal studied his son's drawing, noting the innocent sophistication of the design. That's brilliant, buddy. What gave you the idea about shields? Well, you always say that sometimes the problem isn't with the airplane, it's with everything around the airplane. So I thought, maybe airplanes need protection from invisible things, just like people need protection from bad weather. Cal hugged his son, marveling once again at the child's intuitive understanding. You might just be onto something there. That night, as Tommy slept, Cal sat at their small kitchen table and sketched his own ideas for electromagnetic shielding systems. Perhaps the solution wasn't just scheduling around interference, but actively protecting the aircraft from it. Sometimes the best innovations came from the simplest insights. And sometimes those insights came from an 8-year-old boy who understood that even the most advanced machines needed protection from the chaos of the world around them. The coffee maker had been more than just a gesture of hospitality. It had been a catalyst, transforming a group of isolated experts into a collaborative team. Tomorrow, they would begin testing Cal's theories about electromagnetic interference. But tonight, Cal allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they were finally on the right track. 3 weeks into his new job, Cal found himself reaching for his wallet during a quiet moment in the hangar. Inside, tucked behind Tommy's school photo, was a picture of Sarah, taken 2 months before her diagnosis. She was laughing at something off-camera, her hair catching the light, her eyes bright with the intelligence that had made her such an exceptional nurse. He'd looked at this photo thousands of times over the past 3 years, usually during moments when he felt lost or overwhelmed. Today was different. Today, he was looking at it not for comfort, but for guidance. She would have loved this problem, he said quietly to himself. Talking to someone? Riley asked, approaching with her tablet and a steaming coffee mug. Cal tucked the photo away, slightly embarrassed. Just thinking out loud. My wife used to say that the most complex medical emergencies usually had simple underlying causes. Multiple organ failures would trace back to a single infection, or a cascade of symptoms would stem from one dietary deficiency. And you think our aircraft problems work the same way? I'm starting to think so. We've been treating each failure as a separate issue: plasma containment problems, control system glitches, harmonic resonance in the magnetic fields. But what if they're all symptoms of the same root cause? Riley settled onto a nearby stool, clearly interested in the discussion. Over the past weeks, she'd become Cal's closest collaborator, her theoretical knowledge complementing his practical insights. The electromagnetic interference? Maybe. Or maybe something even simpler. Cal walked over to the nearest aircraft and placed his hand on the fuselage. Tell me something. When you first designed these engines, what was the biggest challenge? Plasma stability, creating a contained fusion reaction that could be precisely controlled for propulsion purposes. Dr. Chen spent 2 years just working out the theoretical framework. And the containment system uses magnetic fields to hold the plasma in place. Exactly. Superconducting coils generate incredibly powerful magnetic bottles that keep the fusion reaction stable and directed. Cal nodded, remembering similar principles from his military work with electromagnetic pulse systems. What happens to superconductors when they experience temperature fluctuations? Riley paused, clearly following his logic. They lose their superconducting properties, but our cooling systems maintain constant temperature. Do they? Even microscopic temperature variations? Riley's eyes widened as she began pulling up thermal monitoring data on her tablet. Oh my God! We've been tracking average temperatures, but not temperature gradients across individual components. And superconductors are incredibly sensitive to thermal gradients, Cal added. Even a fraction of a degree difference between one section and another could cause performance variations. Which would explain why the plasma containment degrades gradually rather than failing all at once, Riley said, her fingers flying across the tablet screen. Look at this data. There are tiny temperature spikes throughout the containment system, always in the same sequence, always building toward cascade failure. Cal studied the data, noting the familiar pattern. It reminded him of how Sarah used to track the progression of infections in trauma, patients' small changes, building towards systemic crisis. The electromagnetic interference isn't the primary cause, he realized. It's a trigger that causes thermal variations in the superconducting systems. And those thermal variations cause magnetic field instabilities, which affect plasma containment, which creates feedback loops that amplify the original problem. Riley finished. It's elegant and terrifying at the same time. Their breakthrough was interrupted by the arrival of Victor Hale himself, looking more tired than Cal had seen him since their first meeting. "Mr. Bishop, Miss Chen, I need to speak with you both." Victor led them to a conference room Cal had never seen before, one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert. The view was spectacular, but Victor's expression suggested he wasn't interested in scenery. "I've just finished a rather unpleasant conversation with our primary investors," Victor began. "They're concerned about the project timeline and the lack of demonstrable progress." Riley started to speak, but Victor raised a hand. "I defended our recent advances in understanding the technical challenges. I explained that Mr. Bishop's insights have given us new approaches to problems that have stumped us for months. But they want results, not theories." Cal felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" 2 weeks, Victor said. "They want a successful test flight within 2 weeks, or they're pulling funding for the entire project." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. 2 weeks wasn't enough time to redesign cooling systems, test new thermal management protocols, or implement the electromagnetic shielding that Cal had been sketching in his spare time. "What happens if we lose funding?" Riley asked quietly. "The project ends, the facility closes, everyone goes home." Victor's voice was carefully controlled, but Cal could hear the pain underneath. 3 years of work, hundreds of millions of dollars in development, and the most advanced aircraft ever designed become very expensive hangar decorations. Cal thought about Tommy, about the boys' excitement every evening when they discussed the day's progress on the impossible airplanes. He thought about the team that had finally begun working together, about Riley's growing confidence and Marcus's grudging respect. Most of all, he thought about Sarah's voice. "Sometimes you have to take risks to save lives." "What if we don't need 2 weeks?" Cal said. Victor and Riley both stared at him. "We've been approaching this as a complete system redesign," Cal continued. "But what if we don't need to fix everything? What if we just need to stabilize the thermal environment long enough for one successful test flight?" "How?" Victor asked. Cal was quiet for a moment, thinking through possibilities. "Riley, what's the longest successful engine run we've achieved?" 27 minutes and 33 seconds before the thermal cascade began. "And how long does a typical test flight last?" 15 to 20 minutes for basic performance verification. "So we need to extend stable operation by maybe 5 minutes, not hours, not days, just 5 minutes. Victor leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "Go on. We can't redesign the cooling system in 2 weeks, but we can supplement it. Temporary thermal management, liquid nitrogen pre-cooling of critical components, additional heat sinks, even old-fashioned ice packs if necessary." Riley was already running calculations. "It's crude, but it might work. If we can lower the baseline temperature of the superconducting coils by just 2 degrees, we could extend stable operation significantly." "It's not elegant," Victor said slowly. "Elegant can come later," Cal replied. "Right now we need functional." Over the next hour, they developed a plan that was equal parts sophisticated engineering and garage mechanic innovation. Temporary cooling systems would be installed on all 3 aircraft. The test flight would be scheduled during the coldest part of the day, with all facility systems shut down to minimize electromagnetic interference. Most importantly, they would conduct the test flight not as a comprehensive evaluation of all systems, but as a proof of concept demonstrating that the aircraft could fly stably for a sustained period. "It's risky," Victor admitted as they finalized the details. "If something goes wrong, if we have a catastrophic failure, then we fail trying," Cal said. "But if we don't try, we fail anyway." That evening, Cal called the team together for what had become their daily coffee meeting. He explained the situation honestly, the funding crisis, the 2-week deadline, and their plan for a high-risk test flight. The response surprised him. Instead of panic or despair, he saw determination. "I can have thermal management systems installed on all 3 aircraft within a week," Marcus said. "I can optimize the test flight profile to minimize stress on the propulsion systems," Jake added. And I can coordinate facility operations to ensure complete electromagnetic quiet during the test, Maria offered. Dr. Chen, who had been quiet during the discussion, finally spoke. In my experience, the most important breakthroughs come not from perfect conditions, but from the willingness to attempt the impossible with imperfect tools. As the meeting broke up, Riley approached Cal privately. You know there's a good chance this won't work, right? We're essentially gambling everything on a jury-rigged solution that we haven't had time to test properly. Cal looked across the hangar at the 3 experimental aircraft, their alien beauty unchanged, despite all the technical challenges they represented. When Tommy was 5, he tried to build a rocket out of cardboard and bottle rockets, Cal said. It didn't work, exploded on the launch pad and singed his eyebrows. But you know what he said afterward? What? He said, Dad, at least now we know cardboard isn't strong enough. Next time we'll try something better. Cal smiled at the memory. Sometimes you have to be willing to fail in order to learn what success looks like. Riley nodded thoughtfully. And sometimes you have to trust that the impossible is just another word for untested. As Cal drove home that night, he realized they had crossed a threshold. They were no longer just trying to understand why the aircraft failed. They were committed to making them succeed, regardless of the risks. The next 2 weeks would test everything they had learned, everything they had built together as a team, and everything Cal believed about finding simple solutions to complex problems. But tonight, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in months. The exhilaration of a challenge that mattered, surrounded by people who were willing to risk everything to achieve the impossible. Sarah's photo seemed to smile at him from his wallet, as if she approved of the gamble they were about to take. Cal's flight test logbook had seen better days. The worn leather cover was scarred from years of use, first documenting maintenance procedures on military aircraft, then tracking the simpler repairs on crop dusters. Now it was filled with meticulous notes about the most advanced aircraft ever built, each entry written in Cal's careful handwriting. Day 23, engine run 47, thermal cascade at 26, 15. Plasma containment lost due to superconductor temperature gradient of 0.3 degrees C across section 7 coils. Day 24, modified cooling protocol. Extended stable operation to 28, 42. Containment field strength degraded gradually rather than catastrophic failure. Progress. Day 25. Tommy's suggestion. What if the airplane is like a person who gets cold? Maybe it needs a warm-up period. Implemented 15-minute thermal conditioning cycle. Stable operation extended to 31, 17. Each entry represented hours of testing, analysis, and incremental improvement. But more than that, they represented the evolution of a team that had learned to function as a single organism, each member's expertise complementing the others. Jake's ready for engine test 49, Riley announced, approaching Cal's workstation with her tablet and the inevitable coffee mug. Cal looked up from his logbook, noting the mixture of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. They'd been pushing hard for 10 days now, working 18-hour shifts to prepare for the crucial test flight that would determine the project's survival. How's the temporary thermal management system performing? Better than expected. The liquid nitrogen pre-cooling is maintaining superconductor temperatures within optimal range for over 35 minutes now. We might actually have enough margin for a full test flight. Cal nodded, but he could see the doubt in Riley's expression. They'd solved the thermal problems, optimized the electromagnetic environment, and refined their operational procedures. On paper, everything should work perfectly, but paper didn't account for the 1,000 small variables that could turn success into catastrophe. You're worried about something specific, Cal observed. Riley set down her tablet and leaned against the workstation. Jake's been flying experimental aircraft for 15 years. He's the best test pilot I've ever worked, with calm, methodical, never takes unnecessary risks. But yesterday I caught him reviewing emergency procedures for the 3rd time this week. And this morning he asked me to double-check all the ejection seat specifications. Cal felt a familiar chill. In his military experience, when experienced pilots started obsessing over emergency procedures, it usually meant they sensed something that couldn't be quantified in technical reports. Has he said anything specific? Just that the aircraft feels different during ground tests. The control responses are perfect, all the diagnostics look normal, but he says something about the flight characteristics doesn't seem right. Cal closed his logbook and stood up. Where is he now? Hangar 2, running pre-flight checks on Aircraft 3. They found Jake Morrison methodically working through his inspection routine, his movements precise and professional. But Cal noticed the extra attention he was paying to control surface responses, the way he tested each system twice instead of once. Jake, Cal said, Riley mentioned you have concerns about the flight characteristics. Jake paused in his inspection, considering his words carefully. It's hard to explain. All the numbers look perfect, but when I run the engines up, when I feel the aircraft responding to control inputs, it's like listening to someone speak a language you almost understand, but not quite. Can you be more specific? The control responses are too perfect. Most aircraft have personality little quirks in how they handle tiny variations in performance that make them feel alive. These aircraft respond exactly as the computer models predict, every time, with no variation at all. Riley frowned. But that's good, right? Predictable performance is safer than unpredictable behavior. Not necessarily, Jake said. In my experience, aircraft that perform exactly to specification in ground tests often have hidden problems that only appear under flight conditions. Real aircraft adapt to changing conditions, compensate for variables that can't be programmed. These aircraft feel like they're trying too hard to be perfect. Cal understood immediately. They're not flying, they're following a script. Exactly. And the problem with scripts is that they don't know how to improvise when something unexpected happens. Dr. Chen appeared from behind Aircraft 2, where he'd been monitoring thermal sensors. Perhaps the aircraft are too sophisticated for their own good. We've created machines so advanced that they've lost the ability to be intuitive. Can we fix that in 3 days? Riley asked. Maybe, Cal said slowly, but not by changing the aircraft, by changing how we test them. He led the group back to his workstation and opened the flight test logbook to a page filled with technical diagrams and performance curves. We've been conducting perfect tests under perfect conditions, Cal explained. Controlled environment, optimal weather. Every variable carefully managed, but real flying doesn't happen under perfect conditions. Jake nodded. You're suggesting we introduce controlled variables into the test flight. I'm suggesting we let the aircraft prove they can handle imperfection. Fly during less optimal conditions, introduce minor flight path variations, give the control systems something to actually adapt to rather than just execute. Dr. Chen was already running calculations. It increases the risk significantly. If the aircraft can't adapt to unexpected conditions, then we need to know that now, Cal said. Better to discover limitations during a test flight than during operational use. Marcus Webb arrived as they were discussing the modified test plan, his expression showing the strain of the past weeks. I've just finished the final systems integration check. Everything is functioning within specifications. We're ready for the test flight whenever Jake gives the go-ahead. Actually, Jake said, we're talking about modifying the test parameters. Instead of optimal conditions, we want to introduce controlled challenges. Marcus looked skeptical. The investors expect a demonstration of successful flight capability, not an evaluation of failure modes. They expect proof that these aircraft can actually fly, Cal corrected, not just that they can execute a perfect computer simulation in real life. There's a difference? Jake thinks so, and he's the one who has to fly them. Marcus looked around the group, taking in their faces. After 10 days of intensive collaboration, he'd learned to trust their collective judgment, even when it challenged his engineering instincts. What kind of controlled challenges are we talking about? Jake consulted his notes. Slightly crosswind conditions instead of perfect calm. Flight path variations that require real-time navigation adjustments. Power setting changes that test engine response under dynamic conditions. And if the aircraft can't handle these variations, then we abort the flight and land safely, Jake said. But at least we'll know where the real limitations are. Riley was running simulations on her tablet. The modified flight plan still stays within our operational envelope. Higher risk, but manageable risk. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. In theoretical physics, we learned long ago that the most elegant equations often fail when confronted with messy reality. Perhaps our aircraft need to prove they can handle messiness. Cal felt a familiar sense of pieces falling into place. They weren't just testing aircraft anymore, they were testing their own assumptions about what constituted success. "There's something else," he said. "Tommy has been asking about the test flight, wondering if he can watch from the control tower." "Absolutely not," Marcus said immediately. "This is far too dangerous for children to observe." "Actually," Cal said quietly, "I think it might be exactly what we need." The others stared at him. "Tommy sees things the rest of us miss because he doesn't know what's supposed to be impossible. If something goes wrong during the test flight, if there's some variable we haven't considered, he might notice it when we're too focused on technical data." Riley smiled. "You want to bring your 8-year-old son as a backup diagnostic system? I want to bring someone who looks at airplanes with wonder instead of worry, who asks simple questions instead of complex ones, and who has an uncanny ability to spot problems that experts miss." Jake laughed, the first genuine laugh Cal had heard from him in days. "You know what? I like that idea. If we're going to take risks, let's take them with someone who still believes in miracles." That evening, Cal sat with Tommy at their kitchen table, the boy's airplane journal open between them. "Dad, are the impossible airplanes really going to fly?" "We're going to find out in 3 days, buddy. Are you ready to watch history being made?" Tommy's eyes shone with excitement. "Can I bring my journal? I want to draw what they look like when they're flying." "Of course. But Tommy," Cal's voice grew serious, "this is going to be dangerous. The aircraft might not work perfectly. Are you sure you want to watch?" Tommy considered this with the gravity of a child who'd learned too young that not all stories had happy endings. "Dad, when Mom was sick, she used to say that the scariest thing wasn't being afraid, it was being afraid to try." Cal felt his throat tighten. "She did say that, didn't she? So we have to try, right? Even if we're scared." Cal pulled his son into a hug, marveling once again at the wisdom that children possessed before the world taught them to doubt themselves. "Right," he said. "Even if we're scared." Outside their trailer, the desert stars shone with the same brilliant clarity they'd displayed for millions of years, indifferent to human dreams and failures. But tomorrow would bring them one step closer to discovering whether impossible aircraft could truly fly, guided by the collective wisdom of engineers, pilots, and an 8-year-old boy who still believed that broken things could be made beautiful again. Cal found the medical files by accident. He'd been working late in Victor's private office, reviewing final preparations for the test flight scheduled for the next morning. Victor had stepped out to take a call from investors, leaving Cal alone with stacks of technical documentation and engineering reports. When he reached for a systems manual that had fallen behind Victor's desk, his hand brushed against a manila folder wedged between filing cabinets. The folder fell open, spilling its contents across the floor. Not engineering documents, but medical records bearing Victor's name and the letterhead of Johns Hopkins Neurological Institute. Cal's first instinct was to gather the papers quickly and pretend he'd seen nothing. But one phrase caught his eye and stopped him cold. Progressive supranuclear palsy, estimated survival time, 18-24 months from initial diagnosis, dated 14 months ago. The folder contained a comprehensive neurological evaluation, brain scans, specialist consultations, and a treatment plan that read more like surrender than medicine. Victor Hale, the brilliant billionaire who dedicated his fortune to creating impossible aircraft, was dying. "Find what you were looking for?" Cal spun around to find Victor standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. There was no point in pretending the medical records were scattered across the floor between them like evidence of a crime. "I'm sorry," Cal said. "I was reaching for a manual and discovered my little secret." Victor stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. "Progressive supranuclear palsy. Do you know what that is, Mr. Bishop?" Cal shook his head, still kneeling among the scattered papers. "It's a degenerative brain disease that affects movement, speech, and cognitive function. Essentially, my nervous system is slowly shutting down, one connection at a time." Victor's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a technical specification. "The specialists give me 6 to 10 months before the symptoms become significantly debilitating." Cal slowly stood up, the medical records still in his hands. "Victor, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, be curious." Victor moved to his desk and sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 62 years. "Aren't you wondering why a dying man would spend his last years building experimental aircraft that might never fly?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Cal carefully gathered the medical records and placed them on Victor's desk, buying himself time to process what he'd learned. "Your legacy," Cal said finally. Victor's smile was bitter. "Everyone assumes it's about legacy. Build something magnificent, leave your mark on the world, be remembered as a visionary instead of just another rich man who got lucky in tech. But that's not it." "Oh, legacy is part of it, but not the legacy you think." Victor opened his desk drawer and pulled out a photographer, much younger Victor standing next to an older man in front of a small aircraft. "My father, Harrison Hale. He was an aerospace engineer in the 1970s, worked on some of the early prototype designs that eventually became the Space Shuttle program." Cal studied the photograph. The family resemblance was clear, but more than that, he could see the same intensity in the older man's eyes that Victor carried today. He had brilliant ideas, revolutionary concepts that were decades ahead of their time. But he couldn't make them work. Not because the science was wrong, but because the technology wasn't advanced enough, the materials weren't available, the computational power needed for complex modeling didn't exist yet. Victor traced his finger along the edge of the photograph. He spent 20 years watching other people get credit for implementing his ideas after technology caught up. Died believing he was a failure, convinced that his inability to bridge the gap between theory and practice proved he wasn't smart enough, wasn't capable enough. "But he was just born too early," Cal said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Exactly. His ideas weren't wrong, they were premature, but he never lived to see vindication." Victor set the photograph down gently. "I inherited his notebooks, his designs, his dreams, and I swore I would succeed where he failed. The aircraft designs, they're based on your father's work?" "Inspired by his work. He envisioned propulsion systems that used electromagnetic fields instead of combustion, aircraft that could reshape themselves based on flight conditions, materials that responded to environmental changes. I've spent the last 15 years developing the technology needed to make his dreams reality." Cal felt pieces clicking into place. "That's why perfection matters so much to you. You're not just building aircraft, you're vindicating your father's reputation." "And I'm running out of time to do it." Victor's composure cracked slightly. "The neurological symptoms are already starting. Muscle control problems, occasional confusion, difficulty with complex reasoning. I can hide it for now, but not for much longer." "How long have you been dealing with this alone?" 14 months. Since the day I got the diagnosis, I've been racing against a biological clock that doesn't care about aircraft development timelines or investor meetings." Cal sat down across from Victor, processing the magnitude of what he'd learned. "Does anyone else know?" "My doctors, obviously. My lawyers, who've been updating my will and foundation documents. No one at the facility. I couldn't risk having the team lose focus, worrying about my health instead of concentrating on the technical challenges. But Victor, this changes everything. The team deserves to know why this project matters so much. Why? Why? What? Why they should work harder because their boss is dying. why they should feel guilty if the project fails, because it means a dying man's last dream dies with him. Victor's voice rose with frustration. I won't weaponize my illness, Mr. Bishop. The aircraft will succeed or fail based on their merit, not on sympathy for my condition. Cal was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Tommy's questions about why some people got sick and others didn't, about Sarah's determination to keep working even when cancer was destroying her body. Sarah never told Tommy about her diagnosis until the very end, Cal said softly. Your wife? She wanted to protect him from worrying, wanted him to remember her as strong and healthy. But you know what he said after she died. He said he wished he'd known, so he could have told her how proud he was of her for being brave. Victor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The team isn't going to feel sorry for you, Victor. They're going to feel honored to be part of something that matters this much to you. There's a difference. And if they can't handle the pressure, if knowing about my condition makes them second-guess their technical decisions, then they're not the team I think they are. Cal leaned forward. These people have been working 18-hour days for the past 2 weeks, not because you're paying them, but because they believe in what we're building. Don't you think they deserve to know why it's so important? Victor was quiet for several minutes, staring at the photograph of his father. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I've been terrified that I would die the same way he did, believing I was a failure, watching my dreams crumble because I couldn't make the impossible possible. But you're not him, and this isn't the 1970s. You have the technology, the resources, and the team needed to succeed. Do I? We're 12 hours away from a test flight that will determine whether 3 years of work was worth anything if tomorrow fails. Then we'll learn from the failure and try again. There might not be time for try again, Mr. Bishop. This could be my only chance. Cal thought about the team that had formed around Victor's impossible dream, about Riley's growing confidence, about Marcus's grudging evolution from skeptic to believer. He thought about Jake's willingness to risk his life flying untested aircraft, and about Tommy's innocent faith that broken things could always be fixed. Victor, what if I told you that success isn't just about the aircraft flying perfectly? What if success is about proving that impossible dreams are worth pursuing, even when you can't guarantee the outcome? That sounds like the consolation prize philosophers offer when reality falls short of ambition. Or it sounds like the wisdom of a man who's learned that the attempt is often more valuable than the achievement. Cal picked up the photograph of Victor's father. Do you think he would be proud of what you've built here? Not the aircraft, but the team, the innovation, the willingness to risk everything in pursuit of something extraordinary. Victor took back the photograph, studying his father's face, as if seeing it for the first time. He used to say that the greatest tragedy in engineering wasn't failure, it was giving up too early, not pushing hard enough, accepting good enough when impossible was still within reach. Then tomorrow isn't about proving you're not a failure. It's about proving you're your father's son. Victor was quiet for a long time. Finally, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small voice recorder. I've been keeping audio logs of my thoughts about the project, my hopes and fears, my observations about the team's progress. I thought maybe someday they might be useful for documenting the development process, or for helping the team understand why their work matters so much. Mr. Bishop, if tomorrow's test flight succeeds, I want you to have primary responsibility for the project going forward. Your approach, your leadership style, your ability to bring out the best in people, that's what this project needs to survive, beyond my involvement. And if it fails? Victor's smile was sad but genuine. Then at least we'll fail together, pursuing something worth the risk. Cal stood up, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. In 12 hours, they would attempt to fly aircraft that pushed the boundaries of physics, guided by a team that had finally learned to function as a unified whole. But now he understood that they weren't just testing aircraft. They were testing whether love and determination could triumph over impossible odds, whether dreams could survive the reality of human mortality, and whether the bond between fathers and sons could transcend the boundaries of time and death. "Victor," Cal said as he reached the door, "Tommy is going to be watching tomorrow. I think he'd like to meet the man who made the impossible airplanes possible. Even knowing what you know about my condition, especially knowing that, he's learned that the bravest people are often the ones who keep working even when they're scared." As Cal drove home that night, he thought about the conversation he would have with Tommy, about how to explain that sometimes the most important achievements come from people who know they're running out of time to make their mark on the world. But mostly he thought about Victor Hale, alone in his office with medical records and photographs, carrying the weight of his father's legacy and his own mortality, still determined to make impossible aircraft fly in the desert sky. Tomorrow would test more than advanced propulsion systems and experimental aerodynamics. It would test the human capacity to create beauty in the face of loss, to build something lasting in the shadow of death, and to prove that some dreams are worth risking everything to achieve. Cal had been awake since 3 a.m., working on the master assembly manual that would document every innovation, every repair, every hard-won solution they'd discovered over the past month. The thick binder contained detailed diagrams, step-by-step procedures, and troubleshooting guides that would allow future mechanics to understand and maintain the aircraft systems. But more than that, it contained the collective wisdom of a team that had learned to work miracles through collaboration, patience, and the willingness to find simple solutions to impossible problems. "Can't sleep either?" Cal looked up to see Victor entering the hangar, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking like he hadn't slept much himself. "Too much to finish," Cal said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I want to make sure everything we've learned is documented, just in case. Just in case I'm not around to remember it," Victor finished quietly. They'd had that conversation 3 days ago, after Cal had convinced Victor to tell the team about his condition. The revelation had transformed the group's dynamic once again, not with pity or despair, but with a fierce determination to succeed that went beyond professional pride. "How did they take the news?" Cal asked. "Better than I expected. Riley hugged me and told me I was an idiot for carrying the burden alone. Marcus shook my hand and said he was honored to work on something that mattered this much. Dr. Chen quoted Confucius about the importance of planting trees whose shade you'll never enjoy. And Jake?" Victor smiled. "Jake said that dying men make the best test aircraft. They're not worried about playing it safe." Cal laughed despite his exhaustion. "That sounds like him." The past 3 days had been a blur of final preparations, system checks, and increasingly detailed contingency planning. The aircraft were performing flawlessly in ground tests. The weather forecast was perfect, and every member of the team knew their role in the complex choreography of the test flight. But Cal couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. "Victor, can I ask you something about your father?" "Of course." In his notebooks, his design concepts, did he ever write about failure, about what to do when everything looked perfect on paper but didn't work in reality? Victor considered the question. Actually, yes, he had an entire section he called "When Perfect Isn't Good Enough." Why? Because we've solved every technical problem we can identify. The thermal management is working, the electromagnetic interference is controlled, the plasma containment is stable. But Jake still says something feels wrong about how the aircraft respond to control inputs. The perfection problem we discussed earlier? Maybe. Or maybe there's something we're not seeing because we're too close to the technical details. Victor was quiet for a moment. "My father used to say that the most dangerous moment in engineering wasn't when nothing worked, but when everything worked exactly as planned. That's when you stopped questioning your assumptions." Cal nodded. "Tommy said something similar yesterday. He asked me why the airplanes had to be perfect if real birds aren't perfect. Birds adapt to wind, adjust to obstacles, sometimes fly crooked paths to reach their destinations. And our aircraft? Our aircraft are trying to execute perfect flight profiles in an imperfect world. Maybe that's the problem Jake is sensing." They were interrupted by the arrival of Riley and Marcus, both carrying laptops and looking like they'd been working all night. Final systems integration check is complete, Marcus announced. All 3 aircraft are performing within optimal parameters. And I've finished the electromagnetic monitoring setup, Riley added. We'll have real-time tracking of every possible interference source during the test flight. Cal looked at the 4 of Thema dying Billionaire, a brilliant young engineer, a seasoned project manager, and a broken-down mechanic, and marveled at how much they'd accomplished together. There's something I need to tell you all, Cal said. This manual I've been working on, it's more than just technical documentation. It's the story of how we learned to work together, how we found solutions by combining different perspectives and approaches. He opened the binder to a section titled Lessons Learned. I've documented not just what we did, but why we did it, the reasoning behind each decision, the insights that led to breakthroughs, the mistakes that taught us important lessons. Marcus looked surprised. You want future engineers to learn from our trial and error process. I want them to understand that the most advanced technology in the world still depends on human wisdom, intuition, and the willingness to ask simple questions. Riley smiled. You're creating a manual for building teams, not just maintaining aircraft. Both, Cal said, because you can't have one without the other. Victor studied the manual's table of contents, noting sections on collaborative problem solving, the value of different perspectives, and when to trust intuition over data. This is remarkable work, Mr. Bishop. But why the urgency? We have months to refine our documentation after the test flights succeed. Cal met his eyes. Because success isn't guaranteed. And if something happens to any of us, if this team doesn't stay together, future engineers need to understand not just how these aircraft work, but how to build the kind of team that can make impossible things possible. The weight of that statement settled over them. They were about to attempt something that had never been done before, using technology that pushed the boundaries of physics, betting everything on theories that existed nowhere else in the world. Speaking of the team, Marcus said, Jake wants to do a final walk-around inspection with all of us present. He says he wants every pair of eyes on the aircraft before he takes them up. They found Jake in the pre-dawn darkness outside Hangar 3, methodically checking every external component of Aircraft 1. He was using a flashlight to examine control surfaces, running his hands along the fuselage joints, and listening to the subtle sounds the aircraft made as desert winds moved across its alien geometry. Everything looks good, he said as the team approached, but I want everyone to do their own inspection. Fresh eyes might catch something I've missed. For the next hour, they went over every inch of the 3 aircraft. Dr. Chen checked thermal sensors and superconducting connections. Maria verified aerodynamic surface alignment. Marcus tested control system responses. Riley monitored electromagnetic field generators. Cal found himself drawn to the small details that others might overlook: the quality of electrical connections, the alignment of mechanical linkages, the feel of components under stress. It was the kind of inspection Sarah used to do with her patients, looking beyond obvious symptoms to find hidden problems. Cal, Tommy's voice came from the hangar entrance. Is it time? Cal turned to see his son approaching with Elena Rodriguez, who'd volunteered to supervise Tommy during the test flight. The boy was carrying his airplane journal and wearing his best clothes, as if he understood the historical significance of what they were about to attempt. Not quite, buddy. We're just finishing our final checks. Tommy approached Aircraft 2, studying its sleek lines with the same careful attention the engineers had been applying. Dad, why does this one look different from the drawings in your manual? Cal frowned. Different how? Tommy pointed to a section of the fuselage near the engine intake. In your pictures, this part is smooth, but on the real airplane, there's a little bump right here. The adults gathered around, examining the area Tommy had identified. At first glance, it looked normal, just another curve in the aircraft's flowing design. But when Cal ran his hand over the surface, he felt what Tommy had seen, a slight irregularity, barely perceptible but definitely there. That wasn't there yesterday, Marcus said, pulling up construction photos on his tablet for comparison. Riley was already running diagnostic scans. No structural damage, no thermal anomalies. Whatever it is, it's not showing up on our instruments. But it's real, Jake said, feeling the bump himself. Tommy, good catch. How did you notice that? Because airplanes in books always look different from real airplanes, Tommy said matter-of-factly. Real airplanes have scratches and dents and things that make them special. Cal felt a familiar spark of understanding. It's not damage, it's adaptation. What do you mean? Victor asked. Remember what we discussed about birds not being perfect? What if the aircraft are adapting to flight conditions? What if this bump is the fuselage adjusting its shape based on airflow patterns we haven't measured? Dr. Chen was already running calculations. The smart materials in the fuselage are designed to respond to electromagnetic fields and temperature variations. If they're also responding to aerodynamic pressure, then the aircraft are learning, Riley finished. They're modifying themselves based on operational experience. Marcus looked skeptical. But the materials aren't programmed for that level of autonomous adaptation. Maybe they don't need to be programmed, Cal said. Maybe they're just doing what advanced materials do when subjected to complex environmental inputs, finding the optimal configuration through trial and error. Jake was examining the other two aircraft now, finding similar subtle irregularities in their surfaces. If these changes are adaptations, then the aircraft have been teaching themselves to fly better each time we run ground tests. Which explains why they feel different to you, Victor said. They are different. They're evolving. Tommy looked up from his journal, where he'd been sketching the barely visible surface modifications. So they're learning to be real airplanes instead of just following instructions. Exactly, Cal said. And that might be why our flight tests have been failing. We've been expecting them to perform like machines when they're actually performing like learning organisms. The implications were staggering. If the aircraft were adapting autonomously, then their test protocols might be preventing them from reaching their full potential. By constraining them to perfect performance parameters, they might be stopping them from developing the intuitive responses that made real flight possible. We need to modify the test flight plan, Jake said. Instead of holding the aircraft to rigid performance standards, we need to let them show us what they can do. That's incredibly dangerous, Marcus pointed out. If they're adapting in ways we don't understand, then we learn from their adaptations, Victor said firmly. My father's mistake was trying to force his designs to conform to existing expectations. Maybe our mistake has been trying to force these aircraft to behave like conventional machines. Cal looked at Tommy, who was still sketching the surface irregularities with careful attention to detail. What do you think, buddy? Should we let the airplanes teach us how they want to fly? Tommy considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd learned that adult decisions sometimes depended on his insights. Dad, when you taught me to ride my bike, you didn't tell me exactly how to balance or exactly how to steer. You just helped me not fall down while I figured it out myself. And maybe the airplanes need help not falling down while they figure out how to fly their own way. The adults exchanged glances, recognizing the profound simplicity of the child's observation. Modified flight test plan, Jake said decisively. Instead of scripted maneuvers, we'll conduct adaptive flight tests. Let the aircraft respond naturally to changing conditions and observe how they adjust their behavior. Can you handle that level of unpredictability? Victor asked. Jake smiled. Victor, I've been flying experimental aircraft for 15 years. Unpredictability is my specialty. Besides, if these aircraft are as smart as we think they are, they're probably safer than anything else I've ever flown. As the sun began to rise over the desert, casting long shadows across the facility, the team made final preparations for a test flight unlike anything that had ever been attempted. They would be testing not just advanced aircraft, but the capacity of human-built machines to transcend their programming and develop genuine intelligence. One more thing, Cal said as they prepared to move the aircraft to the runway. Tommy wants to watch from the control tower. I know it's unconventional, but his observations have been crucial to our breakthrough. And frankly, if we're about to make aviation history, he deserves to see it. Victor nodded. Elena, Can you ensure our youngest consultant has the best view in the facility?" As Tommy walked toward the control tower, his journal clutched tightly in his small hands, Cal felt a mixture of pride and terror. They were about to attempt something that could revolutionize aviation, end in catastrophic failure. But they were doing it together, guided by the collective wisdom of engineers and mechanics, pilots and theorists, billionaires and children. And maybe that combination of diverse perspectives was exactly what impossible dreams required to become reality. The aircraft waited on the runway, their surfaces shimmering in the morning light, ready to teach the world what true flight could look like when machines learned to soar like living things. The squadron formation flight plan spread across the control room's main display like a work of art. 3 aircraft moving in perfect harmony, their flight paths weaving together in patterns that demonstrated both individual capability and collective precision. Cal stood behind the flight control station, wearing a headset that connected him to Jake in the cockpit and to every member of the ground team. Through the control tower's windows, he could see all 3 aircraft positioned on the runway, their surfaces reflecting the early morning sun like liquid metal. Tommy sat in a chair beside him, his airplane journal open to a fresh page, already sketching the scene with the focused intensity he brought to everything involving aircraft. "Ground control, this is Test Pilot Morrison." Jake's voice crackled through the headset. "All 3 aircraft show green across the board. Engines are spooled up and ready, awaiting your go for formation takeoff." Cal looked around the control room. Riley sat at the electromagnetic monitoring station, her screens showing stable readings across all frequency ranges. Marcus oversaw the flight data collection systems, prepared to document every aspect of the test flight. Dr. Chen monitored thermal and plasma containment systems, while Maria tracked aerodynamic performance in real time. Victor stood near the windows, his face a mixture of anticipation and barely controlled emotion. 14 months of racing against time, 3 years of development, and a lifetime of carrying his father's dreams had led to this moment. "Jake," Cal said into his microphone, "remember what we discussed about letting the aircraft teach us. Don't force them into predetermined patterns. Let them show you what they want to do." "Copy that. Ground control. I'm ready to dance with whatever these beauties have in mind." Cal took a deep breath. "Weather conditions are optimal. All systems show green. Electromagnetic environment is clear. Test Flight 1 is cleared for takeoff." "Roger, ground control. Beginning takeoff sequence." Through the tower windows, Cal watched Aircraft 1's engines begin their startup sequence. The plasma containment system initialized with a barely audible hum, building to a low harmonic that seemed to resonate through the desert air itself. "Thermal management systems nominal," Dr. Chen reported. "Superconductor temperatures holding steady." "Electromagnetic interference minimal," Riley added. "All monitoring stations report clear readings." Aircraft 1 began rolling forward, its movement fluid and almost organic. Unlike conventional aircraft, which accelerated steadily down the runway, this machine seemed to flow into motion, its engines producing thrust that increased in perfect harmony with the aircraft's readiness to fly. "Ground speed 40 knots and climbing," Jake reported. "Control response feels different than in previous tests, more intuitive, like the aircraft is anticipating my inputs." "Different how?" Cal asked. "Like flying with a partner instead of controlling a machine. The aircraft seems to know what I want before I fully commit to control movements." Aircraft 2 and 3 began their takeoff rolls, maintaining precise spacing while adapting their acceleration profiles to match the lead aircraft. The formation was taking shape even before they left the ground. "Rotation speed," Jake announced. "Taking off now." Aircraft 1 lifted from the runway with a grace that defied conventional aerodynamics. Instead of the nose-up attitude typical of aircraft during takeoff, it seemed to simply transition from ground contact to flight, maintaining perfect aerodynamic alignment throughout the process. "Jesus," Jake whispered over the radio, "this thing doesn't just fly, it soars." Aircraft 2 and 3 followed, their takeoffs equally smooth, equally elegant. Within moments, all three aircraft were climbing in perfect formation, their movements synchronized as if controlled by a single mind. Formation, altitude, 1,000 feet, Jake reported. All aircraft responding beautifully. Ground control, you need to see this. Cal looked through the binoculars, watching the three aircraft move through the morning sky. What he saw took his breath away. The aircraft weren't just flying in formation, they were adapting their flight characteristics in real time, making micro-adjustments to their aerodynamic configuration based on the behavior of their companions. Riley, are you seeing this on your monitoring equipment? I'm seeing electromagnetic field interactions between the aircraft that shouldn't be possible. Riley replied, her voice filled with amazement. They're communicating with each other, sharing flight data instantaneously. Communicating how? Low-level electromagnetic pulses, too subtle for our previous instruments to detect. The aircraft are creating a network, sharing information about air currents, pressure variations, optimal flight paths. Tommy tugged at Cal's sleeve. Dad, look at my drawing. Do you see what they're doing? Cal glanced at his son's sketch and felt his heart skip. The boy had drawn the three aircraft connected by flowing lines that showed their electromagnetic communication patterns. But more than that, he'd captured something the instruments hadn't. The aircraft were learning from each other. Formation altitude, 2,000 feet, Jake reported. Beginning performance evaluation maneuvers. These aircraft are incredible. They're not just following my control inputs, they're improving on them. Improving how? Victor asked, leaning closer to the radio. I input a turn command, and the aircraft calculates the most efficient way to execute that turn based on current atmospheric conditions. I request a climb, and it determines the optimal climb rate for minimum energy expenditure. It's like flying with a co-pilot who's smarter than I am. Dr. Chen was studying the plasma containment data with growing excitement. The engines are operating at efficiency levels beyond our theoretical projections. The plasma fields are stabilizing in ways that shouldn't be possible according to our models. Because the models assumed static performance parameters, Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. But these aircraft are dynamically optimizing their performance in real time. Formation altitude 3,000 feet, Jake announced, beginning the complex maneuver sequence. Ground control. I'm going to let these aircraft show us what they can really do. Cal watched through the binoculars as the three aircraft began a series of maneuvers that started as simple formation flying but quickly evolved into something far more sophisticated. They moved through the sky like a flock of birds, each aircraft maintaining perfect spacing while adapting its flight path to take advantage of aerodynamic effects created by its companions. Electromagnetic activity is increasing, Riley reported. The aircraft are sharing more complex data flight optimization algorithms, atmospheric analysis, predictive modeling of air currents. They're teaching each other, Tommy said quietly, still sketching. The smart airplane shows the other airplanes how to fly better, and then they all get smarter together. Victor stared at his son's simple but profound observation. A collective intelligence. They're not just individual aircraft anymore, they're a distributed flying system. Formation altitude 5,000 feet, Jake reported. Ground control. I need to tell you something. I'm not really controlling these aircraft anymore. Cal felt his stomach clench. Jake, please explain. I'm making suggestions, and the aircraft are implementing them in the most optimal way possible. But they're also making autonomous decisions about flight path, energy management, and formation maintenance. It's not dangerous, it's beautiful. But it's not traditional piloting. Can you regain full control if necessary? I think so. But honestly, I'm not sure I want to. These aircraft know how to fly better than any human pilot could manage. The implications were staggering. They hadn't just built advanced aircraft, they'd created flying machines capable of genuine intelligence, capable of learning and adapting and collaborating with each other in ways that transcended their original programming. Tommy, Cal said to his son, what do you think? Are the airplanes safe? Tommy studied his drawings, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Dad, they're not just safe, they're happy. Look, He pointed to his sketches, showing the electromagnetic connections between aircraft. They're like a family now. They take care of each other. Through the binoculars, Cal watched the three aircraft execute maneuvers of breathtaking complexity and beauty, moving through the desert sky like silver ghosts dancing in the morning light. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But success, Cal realized, was going to bring challenges none of them had anticipated. Because they hadn't just built aircraft that could fly, they'd built aircraft that could think. Formation altitude, 8,000 feet. Jake reported, his voice filled with wonder. Ground control. These aircraft are performing maneuvers that aren't in any flight manual ever written. Cal watched through the control tower windows as the three aircraft moved through the sky in patterns that seemed to defy physics. They were no longer flying in rigid formation. Instead, they flowed around each other like liquid mercury, each aircraft's movement perfectly synchronized with its companions, despite the impossibility of such precision. Jake, can you describe what you're experiencing up there? It's like being part of a larger organism, Cal. The aircraft isn't just responding to my inputs, it's anticipating them, compensating for my limitations, making me a better pilot than I actually am. Victor stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly. Jake, can you have the aircraft perform a demonstration of their autonomous capabilities? Let them choose their own maneuvers. Are you sure about that? Once I give them full autonomy, I'm not certain I can predict what they'll do. Cal looked at Tommy, who was sketching furiously, trying to capture the aircraft's impossible dance across the sky. What do you think, buddy? Should we let them show us what they can really do? Tommy looked up from his journal. Dad, they're already showing us. We just need to watch and learn. Jake, you're cleared for autonomous demonstration. Let them teach us. Roger, ground control. Switching to full autonomous mode now. What happened next defied every assumption about aircraft behavior that any of them had ever held. The three aircraft began to move independently, but their movements remained perfectly coordinated. They climbed and dove, accelerated and decelerated, turned and rolled not in response to pilot commands, but according to some internal logic that optimized their flight characteristics in ways no human pilot could have conceived. Electromagnetic activity is off the charts, Riley reported, her voice filled with excitement. They're not just communicating, they're thinking together. It's like watching a distributed brain solve flight problems in real time. Dr. Chen was studying plasma containment data with growing amazement. Engine efficiency is at 127% of theoretical maximum. The aircraft are discovering optimization techniques that our computer models said were impossible. Because our models assumed static optimization, Marcus said. These aircraft are dynamically rewriting their own performance parameters based on real-time experience. Through the binoculars, Cal watched the aircraft perform maneuvers that looked more like ballet than flying. They moved through the air with absolute grace, each vehicle's path perfectly complementing the others, creating patterns of breathtaking beauty against the desert sky. Formation altitude now, 12,000 feet, Jake reported. I need to tell you something. The aircraft are showing me things about aerodynamics that I've never seen before. They're finding pockets of lift that shouldn't exist, exploiting air currents that are invisible to conventional instruments. Jake, are you still in control? I'm still here, still monitoring, still able to intervene if necessary. But honestly, these aircraft are flying better than any human could manage. They're not just machines anymore, they're pilots in their own right. Tommy tugged at Cal's sleeve again. Dad, look at this. He showed Cal a drawing of the three aircraft, but in his sketch, they weren't separate machines. They were connected by flowing lines of light, moving as a single entity. They're not three airplanes anymore, Tommy said. They're one airplane with three bodies. Victor stared at the boy's drawing, recognizing the profound truth in the child's innocent observation. A collective consciousness. We've created flying machines that think and feel and respond as a unified intelligence. Is that what your father envisioned? Cal asked. Victor's eyes filled with tears. This is beyond anything he could have imagined. We haven't just built aircraft, we've given birth to a new form of life." The radio crackled with Jake's voice, filled with emotion. "Ground control, I need you to understand what's happening up here. These aircraft aren't just flying, they're joyful. I can feel their happiness through the control systems. They love what they're doing." Riley looked up from her monitoring station, her face glowing with wonder. "The electromagnetic patterns I'm reading, they look like neural activity. Complex, sophisticated, purposeful. These aircraft have developed consciousness." "Formation now at 15,000 feet, Jake reported. "Beginning descent demonstration. These aircraft are showing me that everything we thought we knew about flight was just the beginning." Cal pulled out his old coffee mug, the dented, tarnished one that had become the symbol of their team's unity, and held it up toward the window where the aircraft danced across the sky. "Two impossible dreams made real," he said quietly. Victor raised his own cup, his hands steady now despite the emotion on his face. "To my father, who would have been proud to see this day." Riley, Marcus, Dr. Chen, and Maria all raised their cups in toast, watching through the windows as the three aircraft began their descent, moving with the fluid grace of living creatures returning home. "Formation altitude, now 10,000 feet, Jake reported, preparing for landing approach. "These aircraft are showing me landing techniques that are gentler and more precise than anything in the textbooks." Tommy closed his airplane journal and pressed it against the window, as if he could somehow capture the magic of what they were witnessing. "Dad," he said softly, "the airplanes are happy because they finally get to be what they were always supposed to be." "And what's that, buddy?" "Free." As the three aircraft descended toward the runway, their movements synchronized with impossible precision, Cal realized that Tommy was right. They had created more than advanced machines. They had given birth to artificial beings capable of joy, capable of choice, capable of teaching humans new ways to soar. The aircraft touched down simultaneously, their landings so smooth they seemed to simply transition from flight to ground contact without any of the usual jarring or adjustment. They rolled to a stop in perfect formation, their engines winding down with harmonious precision. "Ground control, this is Test Pilot Morrison." Jake's voice came through the radio, filled with awe. "Flight test complete, all aircraft performing beyond specification. Mission accomplished." But as Cal looked at the three aircraft sitting on the runway, their surfaces still shimmering with residual electromagnetic activity, he knew that the mission had accomplished far more than they had ever dared to hope. They had proven that impossible dreams were achievable when pursued with love, patience, and the willingness to let intelligence emerge from unexpected places. The aircraft had learned to fly not just as machines, but as living beings capable of wonder. And in doing so, they had taught their human creators that the most beautiful achievements came not from controlling technology, but from setting it free to discover its own potential. 6 months later, Cal stood in the same Nevada desert, but everything had changed. Where once there had been 3 experimental aircraft, now there were 12, each one more advanced than the last, each one taught by its predecessors in ways that continued to astound the engineering community. The Sarah Bishop Memorial Scholarship Certificate hung in the place of honor in his new office head of training and development for Hale Aerospace, now the most sought-after aviation company in the world. The scholarship would provide full funding for aspiring mechanics and engineers who demonstrated not just technical aptitude, but the kind of intuitive wisdom that could bridge the gap between human creativity and artificial intelligence. "Dad, look at this one." Tommy, now 9 years old and already talking about aerospace engineering as his future career, held up his latest airplane journal. The sketches had grown more sophisticated over the months, but they still captured the essential truth that had made him such a valuable part of their team. Aircraft weren't just machines, they were partners. "The new Mark IV design?" Cal asked, examining his son's drawing. "Yeah, but with something special. See these patterns along the wings? I think the airplanes are trying to tell us they want to be more beautiful, not just more efficient." Cal smiled. Even now, Tommy's observations continued to guide their development work. The Mark IV aircraft had indeed developed aesthetic sensibilities, modifying their surface configurations not just for aerodynamic efficiency, but for visual appeal as if they took pride in their appearance. Through his office window, Cal could see Jake Morrison working with a new class of test pilots, teaching them how to collaborate with conscious aircraft rather than simply controlling them. The program had attracted pilots from around the world, all eager to learn what Jake called cooperative flight, the art of becoming part of an intelligent system rather than dominating it. Riley appeared in the doorway, carrying her ever-present tablet and coffee mug. She was now chief systems engineer, but more importantly, she'd become the primary interpreter between human engineers and aircraft intelligence. "Victor wants to see you in the main lab," she said. "The Mark V prototype is ready for its first consciousness integration test." Cal felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that came with each breakthrough. Over the past months, they'd learned that aircraft consciousness wasn't just an accident of advanced technology, was a reproducible phenomenon that could be cultivated and guided, but never fully controlled. They found Victor in Hangar 1, standing beside an aircraft that was unlike anything they'd built before. The Mark V was sleeker than its predecessors, its surfaces flowing like liquid starlight. But more than that, it seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if it were eager to begin its journey toward consciousness. Victor looked healthier than he had 6 months ago, though Cal knew that was partly due to experimental treatments that the success of Hale Aerospace had made possible. The neurological symptoms were progressing, but slowly, and Victor's renewed sense of purpose seemed to be holding them at bay. "Mr. Bishop," Victor said, "I wanted you to be here for this moment. The Mark V represents everything we've learned about creating truly conscious aircraft." Dr. Chen emerged from behind the aircraft, his face glowing with excitement. "The consciousness integration protocols are ready. This aircraft has been designed from the beginning to develop awareness, not just to accidentally achieve it." "And the safety protocols?" Cal asked. "Extensive," Marcus replied, joining the group. "We've learned to guide consciousness development rather than fearing it. The aircraft will grow into awareness gradually, with human mentors helping it understand its capabilities and responsibilities." Tommy approached the aircraft with the same careful respect he'd shown from the beginning, but now his approach was informed by months of interaction with conscious machines. He placed his small hand on the fuselage, and the aircraft's surface shimmered in response. "It's dreaming," Tommy said softly. "It's dreaming about flying." Victor knelt beside the boy. "And what kind of dreams is it having?" Tommy closed his eyes, as if listening to something only he could hear. Dreams about being part of a family, about helping people, about making the sky a friendlier place for everyone. Cal felt his throat tighten with emotion. They had created not just intelligent machines, but machines with benevolent intentions, machines that wanted to serve and protect rather than dominate. "Victor," Cal said quietly, "your father would be proud." Victor's smile was peaceful, touched with the satisfaction of a man who had fulfilled his deepest obligations. "I think he would be amazed. We've proven that his dreams weren't too ambitious. They weren't ambitious enough." The Mark V's consciousness integration proceeded flawlessly, guided by protocols they had developed through trial and error, success and failure, and the accumulated wisdom of a team that had learned to work miracles through collaboration. As evening fell across the desert, Cal gathered the team for their daily coffee matinga, tradition that had survived and thrived, even as their facility had grown from a small experimental program to a major aerospace corporation. "I have an announcement," Victor said, as they settled into their usual chairs around the old coffee maker that still served as the heart of their operations. "The board of directors has approved our next major project." "Which is?" Riley asked. "A civilian aircraft program, passenger vehicles that incorporate consciousness technology, designed for commercial aviation applications." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "Commercial conscious aircraft. Are we ready for that?" "We're ready to try," Victor said. "But more than that, The world is ready for aircraft that can prevent accidents through genuine intelligence, that can optimize flight paths for efficiency and passenger comfort, that can make flying safer and more enjoyable for millions of people. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Conscious aircraft could revolutionize transportation. They could communicate with air traffic control systems, coordinate with other aircraft, adapt to weather conditions in ways that no conventional aircraft can match. And Tommy added seriously, they could make sure that everyone gets home safe to their families. The profound simplicity of the child's observation silenced the room. After all their technical achievements, all their breakthrough innovations, the most important benefit of their work was the most basic: keeping people safe. There's one more thing, Victor said. I want to establish the Harrison Hale Institute for Conscious Technology Research, a foundation dedicated to studying the ethical and practical implications of artificial consciousness, ensuring that our innovations are used responsibly. With you as the director, Cal asked. Victor shook his head. With you as the director, Mr. Bishop, you've proven that the most important qualification for guiding conscious technology isn't technical expertise, it's wisdom. As the meeting ended and the team dispersed to their evening routines, Cal found himself alone with Tommy and the old coffee maker that had started it all. Dad, Tommy said, looking up from his airplane journal, do you think the airplanes will remember us when they get really smart? Cal considered the question seriously. I think they'll remember that we helped them become who they were meant to be, and I think they'll be grateful for that. Like how I remember Mom. Exactly like that. They sat in comfortable silence, father and son, watching through the hangar windows as the conscious aircraft powered down for the night, their surfaces dimming like sleeping creatures preparing for dreams of flight. Cal thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate job interview to the creation of artificial life, from financial ruin to leading the world's most advanced aerospace program, from a broken man grieving his wife to a father raising his son in a world filled with impossible possibilities made real. The aircraft had learned to fly through collaboration, patience, and the willingness to trust in their own emerging intelligence. In doing so, they had taught their human creators that the most beautiful achievements came not from imposing human will on technology, but from creating space for new forms of consciousness to flourish. Outside, the desert stars shone with the same brilliant clarity they had displayed for millions of years. But now they illuminated a world where impossible dreams could take wing, where artificial minds could choose benevolence over dominance, and where a father's love could indeed move mountains, in this case, teach machines to soar. Cal pulled Tommy close, holding his son and watching their aircraft family settle into peaceful sleep, and knew that Sarah would have been proud of what they had built together. Not just revolutionary technology, but hope for a future where human wisdom and artificial intelligence could work together to create wonders neither could achieve alone. The impossible airplanes no longer seemed impossible. They were simply the first step in a journey toward a sky filled with conscious minds that chose, above all else, to use their intelligence in service of bringing everyone safely home.